time down by the river sounds really interesting. Did you, were you ever alone down there for very long? Did you?
Oh, I'd stay, sometimes I would be out in the cabin, I'd be there a week at a time by myself, and no problems. I never saw anybody. I never had a reason to feel afraid or anything like that, and I just went about my business as usual. Whatever came along to do, I was doing, and I had a good time, enjoyed it.
Didn't get lonely or anything?
Didn't get lonely, and
Were you afraid at all?
Never was afraid, except one time. A storm came up one night. We had canvas that we'd put over the windows to roll down in case of rain, to roll down to keep the water out of the house. And I rolled the canvas down on the windows and fastened it in the storm. I mean, it was one of those times when the thunder raged and the clouds, the booms they were big boomers. And I've told folks since then, telling about that, I said I did whatever a red-blooded American boy would do. I crawled in the bunk and covered my head. Made it through, but after we had left the cabin and moved back to town when school started, I was told after that a big tree that was right beside the cabin had blown over right on top of the cabin, crushed all the bunks. I mean, it fell on the side of the bunks where it crushed all of them. So I was thankful that we were already moved away by that time.
That you weren't sleeping in that bunk.
Right.
And you said that the area's changed, obviously, the town's changed a lot, but you said even the area down there where the cabin was has changed quite a bit. I think it's probably been strip mined since you were there.
All the things. I didn't recognize. We could pick out where the spring was as we were there this morning. We could locate the spring. Not exactly where the cabin sat, but close to it. But everything is so different. I don't recognize anything. Just like Wartburg has grown up and built up so much now, I don't recognize anything. I couldn't locate the exact spot where we lived.
And you said it was in big timber back then. The timber was big.
Oh, all the timber was it was grown timber forest.
I mean, I meant to earlier on to talk a little more about your life after you were here. You what did your calling become? What was your profession?
Well, I lived with Uncle Sam 4 more years after we left here. We lived 2 years and worked in Rockwood, and another year at Dandridge. I graduated from high school in Dandridge. After that, got a job with the Knoxville Iron Company, 30 cents an hour. And I worked at that. That's what I was doing when I met my wife and we got married. Time moved on. It was a good while before we got married in 1940, 1945. I was called to preach. 1950, I started Carson Newman College. 1958, I finished Carson Newman College. Wasn't because I was dumb, it was because I was poor. And at one time, I was pastoring churches all during that time, but one time my wife sold our living room furniture to get tuition money to push me back in school so I could go ahead and get through. But made it through Carson Newman, graduated in May of 1958. Moved to North Carolina to go to Southeastern Seminary at Wake Forest, and the Lord made it possible for me to pastor 2 half-time churches while I was there. And we had fifth Sundays off because you go to one church one Sunday and the other one the next Sunday. And when you had a fifth Sunday, they didn't know what to do with the preacher, so he didn't have to show up. So we usually took advantage of those fifth Sundays to drive back to Knoxville to visit families on those weekends. But Took me 5 years to do what all the other fellows did in 3, but the Lord blessed us during that time, and I'm going to have the opportunity the third Sunday in next month to go back to one of the churches that I pastored, and it was been 50 years since I was there last, and I'm going to have the opportunity to go back and preach on homecoming Sunday.
Let's see.
I'm looking forward to that.
That's really neat. How many churches have you pastored at over your?
I believe we counted them on the way over. I think it's been 9 churches.
And what was the
A couple of them were 5-year stretches, and then my last church was 15 years in Blount County at Pleasant Grove Baptist Church. And I retired in 1984 on my 65th birthday, and we moved to the location where we live now in Knoxville, and I joined the church in Knoxville and been a member there ever since, some 25 years or so.
When you left here, did you ever come back? Did you come back to visit Morgan County, or?
Never to visit, came back and played basketball a time or two, because it just happened that the schools I went to, or Rockwood especially, played Wartburg in basketball. I remember being back one time.
But did you ever go back down to the
We
cabin
never
site?
come back, never to go back out to the campsite, or the cabin, or anything like that.
So when was your next time back? You left the cabin. How many years went by?
Well, we had a year, I had another year in school here after we left the cabin.
Right. And then after you left Morgan County, how long went by before you went back to the cabin? Like when?
Oh, how long?
Yeah.
I wasn't back there at all after we left with the cabin in Morgan County until last fall sometime. The girls took me out to see what it looked like.
So 80 years went by. He lived down there for the summer, and then 80 years went by, and then last fall they came up.
Go back and the old bridge was still there.
Some of it still
And the road's still there. That's about all that was forbidden.